Regardless trash!
Welcome back to our journey through trash. First part was about building from the ground up on Fulgora, but the trash engineer has higher aspirations. When Kovrax unveiled the quality mechanic, he claimed that it was optional, and I think it's about time that somebody put that to the test, because today we're going to try and reach the Shattered Planet using only the trash that the Factorio gods have given us. I have modded quality completely out of the game, and while I'm still limiting myself to Fulgora as much as possible, there is no avoiding the other planets. But without further ado, the reason I've chosen Gleba first is because I really want military science, and this planet holds the key to fully automated military science without needing to mine it, because remember, if it doesn't come from trash, it's disgusting, much like this planet. If you've forgotten, the main thing we've got to do here is grow and harvest 2 kinds of plants so that we can mash them together into science. Unfortunately, they can only grow in special locations, and those locations are close to the pentapods. These things are horrifying, but I've got to get rid of their nests because any nearby spores will inspire them to destroy my entire base. This is me trying to kill a single small stomper. A single one of these is about as dangerous as a demolisher, except an infinite number of these can spawn if they're at all near where I'm trying to harvest plants. This is why military science is an absolute must to move on from here. In vanilla Factorio, you can get by without any military science research, but not only do I need to deal with stompers, but I've got to defend all of my ships as well. And not being able to research more damage makes defending against asteroids a little rough. Anyway, I don't want to be here any longer than necessary, so I've gone ahead and set up the agricultural towers for the Yamako and Jelly Nuts. They'll be transported by belts alongside each other, and this place is really swampy, so I had to wait around for this puny solar-powered mining drill setup to craft enough landfill to let me place all the belts. You need seeds to actually plant them, and those will be supplied by logistics bots because I'm lazy and want to get this over with. I'm not sure if it wasn't obvious after seeing what I had to do to take on those stompers, but automated defenses are not an option until I get proper military science, so this base is pretty much sacrificial. Regardless, the actual path to science requires mashing up our nuts and turning them into bioflux in these biochambers. Not going to go into too much detail because I've already done a video on Space Age, but the difficulty here comes from the fact that biochambers require nutrients to run, and nutrients can spoil into worthless crap that'll clog the belts. So pretty much everything needs to have some kind of way to eat nutrients and eject spoilage. The best source of nutrients is bioflux, but to make the bioflux you need nutrients. It's a bit of a catch-22, and that means if this process ever stops, everything will rot and break. To try and prevent that, I've got this one assembler that will attempt to turn leftover spoilage into trace amounts of nutrients to kick it back to life. To burn the rest of the spoilage, I brought in these heating towers, and since I just shipped in a nuclear reactor last time, I thought I'd try and power this whole thing with burned spoilage. I'll go ahead and tell you, it didn't work very well. I've also got to filter out the seeds that come from mashing the fruits so that the bots can bring them to the farms and grow even more fruits, but any excess seeds will be burned as well. With bioflux, that's half of agricultural science, but the other half are pentapod eggs. We can multiply them with some water and nutrients. A lot of nutrients. And despite that, a single biochamber is capable of making 40 per second, and so I've got this mess to nearly saturate a blue belt from a single machine. Then I've also got to worry about spoilage there, so I've got another carousel going around and around trying to constantly filter off spoilage. But after that, I can finally make the agricultural science. It's a big mess, and I don't really care. But this is when I realized that there was a little wrench in my plans. I'd intended to research the advanced asteroid processing so that I can produce coal from space, but then I realized that for some reason coal synthesis comes from the rocket turret research, meaning the way that I'd planned to make military science takes military science. Well, this base is on the clock now, since just by landing here I've kicked off the process of evolution and expansion, so the best thing I can do right now is ignore this whole base and head towards Vulcanus. Thanks to the power of just shipping it all from Fulgora, I can build the rocket I need to get off this rock and head back to pick up all the supplies we'll need for Vulcanus. This is why it's difficult to do interesting challenge runs with Space Age, but while I might not be able to rely on trash entirely, I like to think that I'm bringing the appropriate trash mindset, no matter the location. Plus, trying to reach the Shattered Planet without quality is challenge enough, never mind all the downsides of never being able to set foot on Nauvis. This crappy ship manages to make it all the way to Vulcanus, and now I can land on a planet that just has coal sitting there in the ground. I didn't want to need to do this, but all I'm gonna do is mine it from the ground, load it into a silo, and send it straight to my ship. I brought all the necessary supplies to build all the rockets with me, and so I'm just using solar power to power everything. I'm only bringing as much as I need to research everything up to rocket turrets, which comes out to around 6,000 pieces of coal once you factor in productivity modules in the machines and labs. It's a little funny coming here explicitly for that, but pretty soon I've got everything I need and it's back to the ship. Normally getting to Vulcanus is just one planet away, but since my main base is on Fulgora, I've got to go twice that distance. Thankfully, I stockpiled enough ammo to survive the journey. Alright, since I've already made a bunch of red ammo to supply my spaceship, and I've been turning all the spare bricks into walls, I've already got everything I need for military science, except the grenades. They're what takes the coal, as well as some iron, but that's all I've got to do to finish up the science build. It's nice to see, but I can't afford to spend any on physical projectile damage research, even though that's what I really need. All of this is going towards rocket turrets, which unsurprisingly takes rockets. Okay, now I can go back to Gleba to sort all this stuff out. This base has been lying dormant and nothing's tried to kill it, except for when those pentapod eggs I used to test everything hatched and they started eating the gun turrets. I had to just deconstruct the turrets, and thankfully since nothing else in the area was considered a threat, they just died over time. Yes, my ammo was so bad it couldn't even kill the hatchlings before running out. Before setting up the actual farms, I just drive around to various natural patches and harvest everything by hand. It'll keep the spores away from my base, and you can get a shocking amount of science from just this. Oh yeah, and I need some more good, naturally sourced eggs. This build is trash, and not in the good way, but it'll at least be enough to get me the science I need as soon as I kick it off with some more nutrients. I do actually set up some agricultural towers since I've got a good number of seeds now, but I supply them by hand since my crappy solar setup is nowhere near enough to actually power these roboports comfortably. Gleba barely uses any power since the vast majority of the machines are biochambers that run on nutrients, but I've still got to build rockets. Speaking of, since I've got science, it's time to blast some of it up. Agricultural science rots, and so the faster I can get this stuff to the labs, the better. It makes it difficult to estimate just how many packs I'll need, but I'll need at least 3,500 packs to research everything. That's assuming that they're all completely fresh though, so it'll probably be closer to 5,000. While that ship flies out the first 2,000, hopefully the next batch will be done just in time for it to come back. Once those are dropped off at the landing site, they can be loaded into my sushi science setup. The three researches we'll need are carbon fiber for the rocket turrets, the turrets themselves, and then advanced asteroid processing, which takes 2,000 packs alone. Without advanced asteroid processing, it won't matter that we have the coal synthesis recipe because it requires sulfur, and that can only be obtained through advanced carbonic processing. Actually, now that I think about it, I could have made sulfur in Fulgora and shipped it up, but I've got to get agricultural science anyway, so might as well do it the right way. That should be enough, so it's time to head back. Somehow I have, like, exactly enough to get everything. Seriously, I did not expect it to get this close, and it would have been really annoying to set up the science again because I basically let it shut down. If the machines aren't constantly cycling pentapod eggs, they'll hatch, and so to kick it back off again, I need to fly back out there and gather some more manually. Thankfully, I don't need to do that, and now I can pretend Gleba doesn't exist for a while. Enough of that slapdashery, now we can make some real progress, and that starts with this new platform that I've decided to call Finders Weepers. Like I said, all of this was so that I could make coal comfortably in Fulgora's orbit without needing to rely on shipments from other planets. Ordinarily, you'd need a bunch of coal to make plastic, but since Fulgora gives us processing units and low-density structures from scrap, military science is basically the only use for it. This whole platform's goal is going to be to sit in orbit, grabbing as many carbonic chunks as they can get their grabbers on to synthesize them into coal. However, the orbit around Fulgora has medium asteroids, so to get the vast majority of the resources, I'll need to make ammunition to break them apart. That isn't hard at all, though, since it just means crushing a few metallic asteroids and turning that ore into plates and those plates into ammo in an assembler. This is actually good, though, because the medium asteroids provide a lot more resources than the chunks you'd find floating around Nauvis. I've also got to get the ammo to the guns and place the asteroid collectors everywhere. I've got no idea how many asteroids I'll need to plan for, so I've got an extremely optimistic 4 chemical plants turning sulfur and carbon into coal. Then the finished coal will be loaded into the hub so that it can be sent down to the landing pad. Someone said the map view of this platform looks like a samurai scratching his ass, and honestly, yeah, I can kinda see it. But with that, even if it's slow, I've got a reliable trickle of coal. How slow is it? Like 10 or 15 per minute. Yeah, that's enough to make like 3 packs per minute, which is greater than 0, so whatever. At least I can slowly build up a stockpile while researching other things, but even so, military research is actually quite important in Space Age, so I'll definitely want to scale this up. I could just copy this platform and then make like 10 of them to increase my production, but instead I decided that I should probably make a better platform than this, and what better than killing 2 birds with 1 chunk of coal? So the supply of carbonic asteroids in orbit is pretty slim, but if we're moving, we're going to encounter way more asteroids. So if I make a platform meant to travel while also making coal on the side, I'll solve all of my problems. Because I actively want to encounter more asteroids, I make the ship quite wide, casting a wide net of collectors to hopefully get as many carbonics as possible. However, the wider we are, it means the more asteroids we'll need to shoot, and that means we'll need lots of ammo. As much as I'd love to use speed modules and beacons to reduce the number of furnaces, right now power is extremely scarce in space, especially considering our home planet is Fulgora. 2 Tier 2 efficiency modules will reduce power usage by 80%, whereas 2 speeds will increase speed by 60% but power consumption by 120, meaning that for the same power we could instead have 8 furnaces. Also, thanks to the advanced asteroid processing recipe, we also have access to the advanced fuel recipe, which just requires some calcite you can get from crushing asteroids, and is significantly better. I've got the whole fuel processing area as this separate sushi belt, and don't try to understand it too hard, simply trust that the trash engineer knows what he's doing. With that taken care of, all that's left is the coal synthesis area. It's pretty much the same as the last time, but hopefully much faster. I love this way of making a single split belt with carbon and sulfur. The advanced crushing creates some carbon alongside the sulfur, but the process needs a little extra, so having a regular carbon crusher at the end of the belt will ensure that it only outputs when there's room on the belt. That way the carbon from the sulfur will always be used first. But anyway, that's my new Vulcanist ship, Coal Hard Facts. After flying it for a bit, even with efficiency modules and everything, I underestimated the number of solar panels it takes to operate around Fulgora, so this whole thing's gotta grow like a tumor. I take it for a spin towards Vulcanus, and the coal production is night and day. Instead of getting 10 per minute, we're churning out about 3 per second. Except it soon becomes painfully obvious that my ammo production isn't nearly enough. It's partially because I haven't gotten all the damage research, but even so it's lacking, so I just rip up the whole thing and try to jam in another 4 furnaces. It's interesting to see the patterns that the game chooses to deconstruct all the platforms in. I also decide to reduce the number of engines, partially because I don't make enough fuel to supply that many anyway, but mostly because it was going a little too fast, and that's another way to reduce my ammo demand. After my adjustments, it's flying wonderfully now, and now I can make my trips knowing that I'm getting sweet, sweet military science simply by traveling. This is why I wanted to do the challenge like this. Just skimming the stars for space trash is beautiful to me. Now it's time to set up the logistics groups and load up this thing full of supplies, because I'm headed to Vulcanus next. Well, for real this time. By the way, I can only afford to do this because I've got lots and lots of rockets thanks to my endless supply of trash. Simply filling this thing with everything I'll need to build a base takes hundreds of rockets. Isn't this the most beautiful craft you've ever seen? And here we are, Vulcanus, again. After the first video, this time around, I know what I'm doing, so I waste no time in setting up a bunch of pumps on the sulfur fields. The amount of solar I've got will be enough to get this started, but once I've got a pipe of that stuff, I've got to set up a calcite mine. You hardly need any of this stuff, at least compared to the standard ore mines, so this will be enough. After bringing that down on my lovingly supplied belts from Fulgora, I can instantly combine that with sulfuric acid to make tons and tons of steam. Seriously, power is rarely an issue on Vulcanus since you get like 100 megawatts from a single chemical plant. And after feeding that into a bunch of turbines, I'll never need to worry about it again. It's funny that the best planet for solar is also the most irrelevant for solar, perhaps even more than Aquilo. At this point, I've got to go down the checklist of trigger text to unlock foundries, and if you really care that much, watch the other video. Just know I've deconstructed all of these rocks for tungsten ore to make more carbide. And as soon as I've got one, always make foundries in foundries, since you get an extra 50% for free. That'll also let me start making big mining drills to get tungsten ore for real. Those of you who have watched my other video might be thinking, aren't there like demolishers guarding all the tungsten patches? And you'd be correct. Last time I just shipped in a bunch of uranium ammo, but that would require going to Nauvis and mining uranium, which we are not doing because Nauvis is stinky. That being said, relying on gun turrets and red ammo might be possible, but that would potentially cost thousands of bullets and hundreds of turrets. No, instead I'm making explosives. Funnily enough, my only real source of the sulfur it takes are these decorative vents, but I shouldn't need too many of these. With those, I can make landmines. I've got to clear this guy off so I can build on his territory, and hopefully the landmines will convince him to stop being so determined to live. Okay, that could have gone better. It might seem like those things did next to nothing, but demolishers have insane HP regeneration. I think I just didn't pack them densely enough, especially considering that I don't have maxed out explosive damage research either. Alright, Worm, just slither over all those explosives. There you go. Honestly, it ate a lot more of those than I was expecting, but now its territory is up for grabs and I can start mining some tungsten. These big mining drills are great, but they'd look a lot better mining trash. Well, all things in due time. On Vulcanus, most of the challenge is just getting up to this point, but once you've got all the resources, it's pretty easy to make the science, seeing as everything is practically free. Now, remember when I said I'll be bringing the appropriate trash mindset? Well, these things take in lava and spit out molten iron or copper, and you need both to make the tungsten plates in metallurgical science, but that means multiple pipes. Wouldn't it be so convenient if we could just use one pipe for everything? I'm sure most beginners have had this thought, but now we have the technology to do it. For some reason, when the developers are updating the fluid system, they decided that it would be a good idea to let you filter pumps to certain fluids. That being said, trying to shove more than one kind of fluid into a pipe is what we in the business like to call an awful idea, but like that's gonna stop me. Well, I've got to make the tungsten carbide first, which is just some coal and sulfuric acid to make the carbon, and then some tungsten ore to add the tungsten part of tungsten carbide. I was tempted to shove the sulfuric acid into my insane uni pipe, but it would have had zero practical benefit, compared to the lava, iron, and copper, which at least has a slim benefit. Anyway, you can't actually put two fluids into a pipe at once, and so to share it, we'll need some kind of system to cycle between the fluids. What that amounts to are these holding tanks that will contain the fluids when they're not in use, and then pump them back into the uni pipe when it's their turn. There needs to be enough storage to hold all of the fluid in the system, because otherwise it won't be able to clear the main line of everything to make room for the other fluids. To actually make it function, we've got two sets of pumps for each holding tank, ones that pump in and ones that pump out. We can set filters to these pumps so that they'll only allow in one type of fluid, ensuring that the holding tanks won't get contaminated. After that, it's just a matter of cycling the pump so that everything is pumped out to let the desired fluid into the uni pipe. What that looks like is keeping the pumps going into each tank online unless we actively want that fluid in the system, and enabling the pumps out only when we want it. That can be achieved by a simple clock using combinators. This thing will count up every frame until it reaches the limit and resets. If we use some other combinators that will only output some control value when the clock signal is between something like 0 and 30, then we can disable the inbound pumps and enable the outbound pumps when it's in that range. Do that for the three separate fluids, and it should let them cycle painlessly. I've just got to build the rest of it first, but the tungsten plates are just tungsten ore plus molten iron. Given that, at best, these machines will only have access to the fluid they need 1/3 of the time, I've decided to make a couple extra. Same thing for the metallurgical science, which takes plates, carbide, and molten copper. Again, I've connected all of these to one pipe, but after that's all set up, all I gotta do is hook up the power to the tungsten mine and see if this thing actually works. I've set up some indicator lights to show which fluid is currently being pumped into the system, and lo and behold, this thing is actually working. Poorly. It is funny seeing all the foundries turn on at once before dying, but the main problem isn't swapping the fluids, it's how long it takes to drain the uni pipe. Like, filling it up is almost instantaneous, but draining it is way slower. The first 99% seems to go away almost instantly, but it's that last 1% that's the problem, and until the pipe is completely clear, the next fluid can't come in. However, I have a brilliant solution. Just add more pumps. Now I've got like 20 pumps all trying to simultaneously drain each fluid into the respective tanks, and the increase in production is enormous. Since it doesn't take so long to drain, I can increase the frequency of the cycles, and because the machines themselves can hold a bit of a fluid buffer, it makes it even more efficient. I mean, not as efficient as just being able to run them 100% of the time, but it's beautiful. Compared to before, we were getting something like 100 plates a minute, but with nothing but more pumps and adjusting the lengths of the cycles, we've got around 400. There's our fully automated metallurgical science, ready to be picked up whenever we want. I'm basically done here, and unlike Gleba, this place is 100% safe from enemies, so I won't need to worry about it pretty much ever. As usual, everything to make the rockets will be supplied by Fulgora, and so this is all I gotta do. What's that? Turbo belts? The trash engineer has no need for that luxury. I have played for 8 years with only blue belts and 45 items per second will be plenty. You kinda forget since I've been on Fulgora this whole time, but I never actually bothered to make electromagnetic science, so yeah, I should probably do that. Everything it takes can be made from scrap, and since I've already done the hard part of sorting all of the trash into nice clean lanes, it'll be pretty easy. The first part is using the holmium ore that we've been previously throwing away in the thousands to make holmium solution. It takes stone, holmium ore, and water, which even further competes with purple science, but whatever. I mainly held off on this because I wanted foundries to make the holmium plates with even more efficiency, but considering how much scrap processing we're doing, I doubt we'd ever have a scarcity of it. Regardless, that's the plates, but the rest of this stuff mainly takes random scrap products. This whole thing's a bit of a mess, and so I've got to do a bit of spaghetti-mancy to bring it through the whole base. Apart from the holmium plates, we've got to extract copper, plastic, green circuits, iron plates, and batteries to make everything. Again, pretty easy considering I've already got it on belts. The next part is this electrolyte, which takes even more stone, as well as some holmium solution and heavy oil. Not a problem considering we've got a whole ocean of it. Then there's the superconductors. They take a bunch of plates, but also light oil this time. Since I've already got water over here for making the solution, it's easy to make a few cracking plants to convert heavy oil into light oil. Those are really only used in supercapacitors, which take some of those, as well as some electrolyte. I can't believe in my first run of Space Age, I failed to realize that the electromagnetic plants are flow-through, meaning that I've just got to hook up one of these pipes to these plants and it'll feed the others. Well, with those, it's mostly finished. The last ingredient is accumulators, and those only take iron plates and batteries. I'll just output those onto the other half of the supercapacitor belts and then feed the electroscience plants. It's worth pointing out that I'm using efficiency modules because each one of these takes 2.0 megawatts, which is over 5 times as much as a single Tier 3 assembler. They're worth it, though. Then I just route those into the sushi science and voila! Speaking of power, the first thing I want to get with this science are the upgraded lightning collectors. They extract even more power from the atmosphere, but I'm more excited about their increased range, which means it won't be as annoying to cover everything with lightning protection. Oh yeah, and I made like half as much electrolyte as I needed on accident, so whoops. The next thing I'm going after are Tesla turrets. I didn't use them last time because I didn't really need them, and I falsely assumed that they took ammunition because of the Tesla ammo, but turns out that's only for the handheld Tesla gun. Anyway, you might recall that despite having metal and electroscience, I don't actually have agricultural science anymore, and that's because up until now I haven't had an effective way to fight off the stompers that would attack a fully automated Gleba, but that changes now. Gleba's going to need its own ship, and why mess with perfection? I could get even more coal if I just make a duplicate of that other ship, so here it is, carbon copy. Thankfully it's automatic, but even so, it'll take a while for that thing to build. In the meantime, I am researching the 5,000 pack science required to get mech armor, because I've been stuck in modular armor for far too long. Being able to jump over everything is nice, especially considering that I still can't fill my armor with exoskeletons, because that would take personal fission reactors which take uranium which come from Nauvis. Still, it's enough for me to fit at least 2 exoskeletons, as well as upgrade all of my roboports and personal batteries with the most powerful versions. With this many batteries, I'll be able to store several minutes worth of exo power despite the awful solar on Fulgora. Well, back on Gleba, there's a couple nests I want to take out, and what better excuse than to use the new handheld Tesla gun. Turns out, it's not that great. If it weren't for the mech armor's ability to fly over water they can't reach, I'd definitely die. Oh well, at least it's marginally better than red ammo. It's at this time that for no reason I decide that I should have mirrored carbon copy so that I can tell them apart. And thankfully that's as easy as deconstructing the whole thing into storage and then pasting the flipped version. The pipes to the engines take a little tweaking, but that's it. Honestly, after looking at the other one for so long, this looks kind of uncanny. Whatever, everything's already set up to make science, so all I've really got to do is install the turrets. But here's the catch of Tesla turrets. They take 1 megawatt each continuously. And seeing as how awful my spoilage to power is, I've got to rely on solar for that. At least the solar here is better than it is on Fulgora, but it's still solar, so it sucks. We've got medium stompers too, so let's see how the turrets compare to the handheld variant. Now that's pretty good. The secret to their power is that each lightning bolt can jump, and each of the stomper's legs are valid targets, meaning that the same shot can hit the stomper multiple times. That should be enough to keep my farm safe. When I was first here, I relied heavily on scavenged fruits, but this time I've got to set up the full automation, so I've got to take a bunch of those spare seeds and make them into artificial soil. It's pretty easy, and you can thank us at the land for that, because in the beta it took like 10 times the effort. You'll need roughly twice as many Yamakos as jelly nuts, so that's why I've added an additional tower. I really wish you could turn off the harvesting, but not the planting. But anyway, I've got a circuit that disables the farm if there's a backup of fruits, so that it won't uselessly harvest plants just for them to rot. But that's about it. Fully automated agricultural science and a dedicated ship to bring it in. We've got everything we'll need for the next stage of the game. Aquilo. Well, mostly everything. There's still a few minor things like actually making carbon fiber on Gleba, and oh yeah, the entire ship will need to do it. So Aquilo is special, and that's because unlike Gleba, Vulcanus, and Fulgora, there's big asteroids around it, and those can't be destroyed with simple gun turrets. We'll need rocket turrets. Yeah, those things I made at the start of this video, it's finally time to use them. I started out thinking I was going to use foundries to make all the iron plates, but even with efficiency modules, their minimum energy consumption is 500 kilowatts. Yeah, they're twice as fast and have an additional 50% productivity bonus, but when you consider that for the same power I could have 14 electric furnaces, it's obvious what I've got to choose. Energy is going to be extremely scarce, and that's because the space around Aquilo has even worse solar than Fulgora. In the first Space Age video, I went here using a nuclear reactor, but that's not really an option. Instead, I've got to use lots of solar. Even though I've got decent damage research thanks to military science, it'll still take a ton of metal to survive the onslaught of asteroids around Aquilo. There's also the matter of the explosives I've got to make for the rockets. Though I'm already pretty familiar with making the coal they take, considering all my other platforms do it for fun, so this isn't too unfamiliar. The problem with these junk designs is that I don't even know where to start trying to explain them. All I can really say is that it does the thing I need it to do. Like, the way that I set up this fuel processing should probably be illegal, but that's the main body of the ship. Now I've just got to slap on 1,000,000 solar panels so it can actually fly away from the sun. I used the remote view to set up some stack inserter production on Gleba, because they're good. We'll be seeing a lot more of these in the future, and so it's important that I point them out now. Anyway, just like all the other planets, if I want to build anything on Aquilo, I'm gonna need a bunch of supplies. I've basically been treating every base as if it were Aquilo, completely incapable of making supplies on site, so this isn't anything unusual. But there it goes, my beautiful flagship pardon the mess. Though, to make a long story short, it didn't do very well. It made it to Aquilo, but that was about the best it could do before getting stranded with no ammo. The issue was simply not having enough asteroids. I don't think I've complained about them in this video yet, but without quality, these asteroid collectors suck. As soon as it's back in the garage, it's evident that I'll need to add way more of them to pick up all the chunks I'll need. Also, the space around Aquilo is almost exclusively oxide asteroids, and when I need metallic and carbonic to fuel my ammo production, that's a problem. To solve that, with the power of magic, you can try to reprocess asteroids into the other varieties, so I've got a simple circuit set up that reads whether we've got excess oxide chunks and tries to turn them into the other two. There, now it's space-worthy. Honestly, I wasn't so sure how well solar panels would handle the trip to Aquilo, but even if it took a lot of them, we're doing pretty well. Ah, the frozen wasteland known as Aquilo. I'll be honest, when I first saw it at the LAN event, I thought it was the coolest planet, and after all of this time, it's still my favorite planet. Without a robust supply network, you're gonna have a rough time here, but since my Fulgora base is easily capable of supplying everything we'll need, it's a lot less scary. The first step is to get some actual electricity here. If you thought the solar was bad in orbit, it's even worse down here. The days are short, and the solar panels only give off 1% of their usual capability. Even so, there's no avoiding it, because to make the real power, we need steam. That means we're stuck using solar to power a few pitiful chemical plants to try and turn the liquid ammonia ocean into ice that we can then melt into water. Oh yeah, and without heat, everything freezes. Efficiency modules and rocket fuel, highly recommended. As soon as I've got some water stored up, I can take a heating tower and feed it with rocket fuel until it gets hot enough to run some heat exchangers. By the way, a single one of these steam turbines is worth 9,700 solar panels down here, so yeah. Even if it's hand-fed using fuel shipped in from Fulgora, it's a reliable source of power, so now I can set up the next step. You may have noticed that the ocean is very big, and if you got any hopes of building beyond this little island, you're gonna need some ice platforms. They're pretty easy, all things considered. All you've got to do is separate the ammonia and ice in a chemical plant, and then put them back together in an assembler. It might not sound like it makes sense, but the ice platforms take 100% of the ice and only 80% of the ammonia, so I guess that explains how you get a solid platform out of it. The rest of the ammonia can be combined with some of the crude oil around to make solid fuel. Solid fuel has lots of uses, but the main one is burning it to heat up the entire build. A good ice platform build is the cornerstone of any Aquilo base. Oh yeah, and you need concrete to build on top of ice, so get used to shipping that in. I don't want to be beholden to imported fuel forever, and just like we made fuel from the excess ammonia from the ice platforms, we can make ammonia explicitly to make fuel. I'm going to build this whole thing in the middle of the ocean just for convenience, but you can make quite a bit of solid fuel from relatively few ammonia plants. There's the matter of the ice, but you can just shove that all into a recycler to get rid of it. On Aquilo, what were once simple problems like putting 2 fluids into a single chemical plant are now a lot more complicated with the heat pipe restrictions. I'm finally getting the hang of them though, and as soon as I've planned out this whole thing to make the solid fuel, all that's left is to burn it in the heating towers. Oh yeah, can't forget that you need water to turn into steam, but you get more than enough ice to meet all your water demands. I just gotta bring it all the way up here while making sure that the pipes won't freeze. From just 12 standard chemical plants making solid fuel, this whole thing will be capable of outputting nearly 1 gigawatt. That's some serious power, even by space age standards, and all without those pesky nuclear plants. Funnily enough, despite being 500 degrees Celsius, pipes carrying steam need to be heated by heating pipes. And now that I'm trying to paste this whole thing here, I'm starting to think that maybe I overbuilt it, but whatever. Also, unfortunately, I'm too good at this game and built the whole thing too fast for the necessary ice platforms to be finished. Either that or I'm bad at the game because I didn't build enough. I'll let you be the judge. The robots have a difficult time overcoming the negative 200 Celsius atmosphere, but with enough roboports to charge them, anything's possible. Now I'll just stand here and chill while they do their work. It's worth pointing out that as much as I'd love to let my personal robots help, they're running off of the batteries in my suit, so I'm saving them for real applications. Because again, I'm restricted to solar in my equipment, and there is no solar here. While I was watching this, I was jolted awake by some sudden alerts, and it's those damn pentapods. They're wrecking my beautiful farms. Well, once it's gone, I think the issue was that the towers just weren't packed tightly enough, and that there was only one power source supplying them, so if it got stepped on, they were dead in the water. So I rectify that, and as much as I'd love to make like 20 more, I'm limited by power here. Anyway, after hooking up the crude oil, this baby's churning out more power than I'll ever need. Now I can clear off this old stuff and start to work on the science. The important stuff here takes cryogenic plants, which can be made from lithium, and a bunch of stuff we'll just import from Fulgora. You can scavenge raw lithium from the ice chunks, but I won't have enough to make all the plants I'll need. Which is why our first step is going to be making raw lithium. Lithium takes 2 fluids, but now that I'm looking at it, it's annoying to deal with routing heat pipes around so many fluid pipes, so what if we just not? Anyway, it takes ammonia and lithium brine, as well as some holmium plates. Yeah, we'll need to import that from Fulgora, but I've set up ammonia extraction twice already, so it shouldn't be too hard. I'm also going to make some solid fuel down here, because this whole build is going to need a reliable source of heating. Also, it's used in something later. Then I've got to set up the furnaces that will turn the raw lithium into lithium plates. It looks like a mess, but I'm simply taking in holmium plates while routing the raw lithium onto a belt as well as some furnaces, since we'll need it in both the raw and the plate form to make the science. There's also the matter of the lithium brine, but it just comes from the ground. The easiest way to bust things around on Aquilo is to make each lane separated by heat pipes, but about the fluid situation. Yeah, I'm going to sushi pipe again, but this time it's actually not so crazy. Requiring only one pipe actually massively simplifies the heat pipes, and unlike on Vulcanus, the crafting times of a lot of these recipes are very slow. The lithium in particular takes 10 seconds to craft, so I'll have plenty of time to cycle the fluids. I can't stack pumps as easily as I did on Vulcanus since they all need their own heat source, but the concept is the same. There's actually another recipe that takes fluorine and ammonia, but instead of cycling 3 fluids in the same pipe, I'm making 2 pipes that cycle both. This is the perfect balance between crazy and practical, I think. Because of that, I can also massively simplify the hot fluoroketone production, letting me run a single belt down the middle instead of needing to finagle around 2 separate pipes. That belt in the middle will carry the raw lithium and solid fuel they take. And you know what I appreciate? That now I can simply turn off the machine directly if there's too much hot fluoroketone in the tanks. We want there to be some room left over because hot fluoroketone is produced by several recipes and we don't want it to get clogged. Speaking of, you've got to cool down your fluoroketone before you use it, so here's a few cooling plants. That leaves only the science itself, and their crafting time is quite a long one, so we'll need a bunch of these. The fluids are simple, cold goes in, hot goes out, and the only other ingredients are those lithium plates and some ice. Yeah, simple ice. I considered building it in such a way that allowed space for beacons, but personally I think it looks way better without, and damn the consequences. Also, any ice at the end needs to be recycled, but there it is. Now I can paste this and wait the several eternities it's gonna take to finish. This is why I made sure to place a bunch of roboports in between the builds, but there's also the matter of routing the lithium brine into the holding tanks for the uni pipe. I love the way things look when they're frozen. It's a shame you only get to see them when you're first building or you've catastrophically messed up. It's going to take quite a while for everything to heat up, and in the meantime I can get that fluorine. It's all the way up here, but just like the lithium and the crude oil, it's extracted using pump jacks. Getting the pipe down there and the heat up here is a bit of a pain, but fortunately not impossible so long as my heating towers stay online. Which they should, since I'm constantly making excess fuel for that very purpose. The finishing touch is hooking up the crude oil and finally bringing in those holmium plates. And here it is, the finished cryogenic science. I could just look at this thing for hours. The sushi pipes, the winter wonderland, it's beautiful. Some people look at me weird when I tell them Aquila is my favorite planet, but it's because of how interesting and unique all of the designs end up looking. Now to make some rocket silos so that we can finally ship some of this cryoscience off the planet. I'm not entirely done here yet, but there's a couple more things I've got to take care of first before I can finish this base off. Anyway, we fly pardon the mess back to Fulgora and drop off our fresh cryogenic science. There's a reason I'm using sushi belts to feed all these labs, and that's because with this next science pack, that's 11 different packs I've got to shove into a single 3x3 building, plus the extra inserter necessary to take out rotted agricultural science. This is why I've upgraded all of the inserters dropping science onto the belts into stack inserters, allowing me to fit 4 times as much onto the same belt thanks to the power of putting things on top of each other. I fly my very first ship out to Vulcanus because to make quantum processors, it takes an intermediate ingredient from Vulcanus, Gleba, and Fulgora. On Vulcanus, all I'm really doing is adding some more rocket silos, but it's a little annoying because you can't just ship silos, you gotta bring down all the stuff and make them by hand to craft them when you get there. All I really need is a way to ship a couple pieces of tungsten carbide, but I upgrade the tungsten plates as well, since there's another thing that takes them. But that's basically it, and I hitch a ride back to Fulgora with the main ship since it happened to be in the area. Also, it's worth pointing out that I've realized just how many accumulators you need to keep a decent Fulgora base powered. I've got 2 whole islands dedicated to them, and I'm still losing power during the day. Quality accumulators store up to 6 times as much electricity, so they benefit quite a lot from it. Just with uncommon accumulators, I'd be able to store twice as much. If I wanted to seriously use beacons in my builds, I can't even imagine how many islands of accumulators I'd need. Well, the other things I need for the quantum processors are carbon fiber and superconductors, but I've already got the fiber on Fulgora to make the rocket turrets, and I've already got superconductor shipping set up when I was making the cryo plants, so that's everything. Back on Aquilo, last time I made these, I just used logistics bots, but I wanted to do them correctly this time. They're uniquely different out of all the things on Aquilo because they take 5 separate ingredients as well as fluid requirements. Once again, the electromagnetic plants are flow-through, so I can get a little creative with the fluids, and that gives me the necessary room to fit all the inserters and heat pipes to grab everything, then the inserters that output the finished processors. The items will be pulled directly from the cargo pad, and their fluids come from Fluidland, I don't know. I probably didn't need to make this many of them, considering that they're used primarily in a science that I'll never be able to make, but the real reason was because they're necessary ingredients in not only fusion power, but also railguns, which are necessary to beat the game. Seriously, I can't stop staring at this thing. But, fusion reactors are nice because they're a way to get effectively infinite power whenever I need it, all without needing to worry about nuclear reactors. I've set up this nice little automation area, so I'll be able to ship them into orbit later, along with the fuel cells and automated cryo plants. Lastly are the railguns, but I'm just setting these up for when I need them. It's gonna be a while before I get around to using them. Before I leave, there's one last thing I want to take care of. My source of lithium brine is 3 puny wells, and the only other source is across the entire ocean, so for the first time, I'm setting up a train. Building trains on Aquilo is a little unique because you can't just route heat pipes everywhere. Instead, you've got to make a train that carries fuel so that you can heat things up on the other end of the track. There should be enough lithium brine to last my base until the end of the world, and so I've just got to set up this train to carry both the fluid back and some fuel. I should have used burner inserters just to ensure that this thing won't ever freeze. The train's double-headed for convenience, since only a megabase would ever need more than one train on Aquilo. That being said, there's just something special about seeing trains trundle across a vast ocean of ammonia. That's Aquilo pretty much finished forever, except for one last thing, and that's shipping out barrels of cold fluoroketone and lithium. I hinted last video that you can actually build over the oil ocean, it's just that it takes endgame research and a crapload of resources. Foundation will let us build over anything, but in exchange for such power, it's extremely expensive. Even so, it's what I've been waiting for. It's time for the penultimate act, rebuilding Fulgora. I said last video that I thought my trash design was lacking and inelegant, and not one to leave things unfinished, we've got to make a real Fulgora base. Also, I just needed better science for the infinite research I'm gonna need. The beginning of the better base starts in the lab, where I'm cooking up some secret techniques. Everything is going to be on a mixed belt, and so making it as efficient as possible is paramount. With the stack inserters, we can stack items, but the problem is scrapping scrap onto belts makes them continuously vomit out unstacked items. That means they take up 4 times the space of their stacked brethren, and that's bad for throughput. Instead, what I've devised is this method for outputting the scrappers into chests. This way I've set up a stack inserter such that it will only grab things of which there are at least 4 of in the chest. This way it only picks up things that can make a full stack. I was using a combinator to filter out any signal under 4 from the chest at first, but a much better solution was to load a constant combinator with a value of -15 for each potential result from scrap. With the inserters hooked up to both the chest and the constant combinator, that way only when there's 16 of an item will it be able to overcome the negative number from the constant combinator, set itself as a filter, and then cause the stack inserter to grab all 16 at once and make 4 stacks with perfect efficiency. I can do this for as many recyclers as I want, and be left with super compressed belts. Remember my 30-lane sushi bus? Well, just these 6 lanes are equivalent to 24 lanes without stacking. I'll be taking things off the trash belt just like before, but with stack inserters this time. However, stack inserters are special and will only swing when their hand is completely full. That's both a blessing and a curse, because it means that while they might catch more, it also opens up room for leakage if the inserter in the back is waiting with 12 in its hand and then 8 items pass by. I've solved this most ingeniously. I can control an inserter's hand size with a signal. What I've done is make a clock that pulses once every 2 seconds. Ordinarily, the hand size will be 16 as supplied by a constant combinator, but when the clock pulses, -12 is added to the wire, making it 4 for 1 frame. That will cause any bulk inserters currently holding on to something to immediately drop their hand while still keeping everything perfectly stacked. I can tell you, this works flawlessly. After staring at it for a while, it let absolutely nothing get through. That's great in theory, but we've got to put it into practice. I've chosen this island up here as the site for the new base, and the first step of recycling scrap is getting scrap. To get about 8 stacked lanes, I'm going to be churning through tons of this stuff. Thanks to my testing, I know that I'm going to need a new train about every 8 seconds to keep up with demand, so this unloading station's going to need some decent throughput. Oh yeah, and I researched better support so now I can actually build elevated rails on the deep oil. The 6 lanes from the trains get balanced into 8 before being fed into 4 of these recycler setups I've made. You know this is a serious build because I'm using beacons. This is also why I wanted to wait for Foundation, because now I don't need to worry about the few belts that had to pass over the oil. This will roughly output 4 completely stacked lanes, but the trash belt itself will be balanced across 8 lanes, and that's for reasons. Just like last time, I'm going to immediately remove the ice from the belt since it only has one purpose. It'll melt into the water that will run several later processes, such as the cracking of heavy oil down to light oil, and light oil down to petroleum so that I can make sulfur later. I set up the inserters and my magic combinator. It's so nice knowing that this design won't let any items leak through. The next thing is to yank all the solid fuel off the trash bus and turn that into rocket fuel with the help of the light oil we just made. This is still just like last time, but this is where things start to diverge. Firstly, despite being basically free, power is a real problem. With Foundation, I could pave every single island with accumulators on the same grid, but I'm lazy and I've got to get rid of excess solid fuel anyway, so why not burn it? Since finishing Aquilo, I've realized the power of a couple heating towers, and the amount of fuel you get from scrap is insane, so this base will have no problem powering itself from its own waste. I'm using some Foundation to route the steam pipes across the ocean just because of how much space all the turbines will take. This is some serious power, and that requires some serious turbines. The next thing to be unceremoniously yanked off the line is concrete. There's no use for concrete here, so it can be safely destroyed. There is, however, an urgent need for all the bricks that spits out, though the iron ore is completely useless. While I'm here, I'm also making the sulfur for chemical science, since it fits. Those will be stacked onto a belt that I'm routing all the way back to the start of the trash belt, because, you know, the yellow from the sulfur will really bring it some much needed color. That's all the items that have only one use, so now for the actual assembling. Near the start of the first video, I talked trash about sushi belts, but now I've come full circle. With the power of these stack inserters, I think the increased throughput will overcome the main downside of sushi belts, which is unreliable supply. We're still feeding from the main trash belt, but this time the inserters are controlled by a combinator. For red science, I need iron gears and copper plates. I can put a value of 400 as the number of both that I need on the sushi belt. If I read the contents of the sushi belt itself, multiply that by -1, and then add that to the value from the constant combinator, I can then feed that result into the inserters as a filter. Only positive values can be set as filters, and so when there's greater than 400 of that item on the belt, the value will go negative and stop the inserters from adding more. This will ensure that there's always room to output stuff as well. This is the same for every sushi stack I'm making, and for things like green science I'll need gears, plates, and green circuits, but all of those will be taken from the main line in the same way. The difference is that green science will take inserters and belts, so we've got to make them in the sushi belt first. Each one of these assemblers are not immune from controls either. We also want to read the belt and stop the inserters from dropping things if we already have enough of it. This is important to keep the entire belt from becoming saturated by something like inserters until there's no room to even make the science. That's the general gist of it, and so I probably don't need to explain too much as I make all the other sciences, but for things like the engines in chemical science, I'm making them in one sushi stack and transporting them to another stack directly instead of dropping them onto the main trash line. This will keep things remarkably efficient, because while it might be funny to just drop them on the trash with nothing but a prayer, I actually want this base to make science. I've just got to repeat this process of setting up stacks, programming in the resource requirements in the constant combinator, and adjusting the inserters for each recipe. It's a little tedious, but trust me, it'll be worth it. I've separated most of the important intermediates into their own stacks, and I'll bring them to the other science assemblers the same way as the engines. I did a lot of this for aesthetic reasons, but I regret sticking rails and furnaces into the same stack, since rails are needed in such high volume, as well as making grenades, ammunition, walls, and productivity modules in one stack. Regardless, my intermediates come out from the top, while the stuff from the trash comes from the bottom. You might notice that I've done all of this with ghosts, and that's because this island is completely separate from my supplies, and I can just build it all at once I'm done. But that's all the basic sciences. There is, however, the matter of electromagnetic science. I don't want to go into too much detail because I've already covered it in this video, but all the holmium ore will be cleared off the line along with some stone to make the solution. That solution turns into plates and electrolyte, and that covers the basics. Everything else will be made on two separate sushi belts, one making superconductors and supercapacitors, while the other one makes the accumulators and the science itself. It upsets me a little bit that the science plants need to be a little taller than all the others because they take fluids and I need to fit in beacons, but that's life. Everything else they need comes from the trash belt as usual. Stone bricks are so valuable that any leftover stone gets yoinked off the belt to be made into bricks before being routed onto the same belt that handles the bricks from the concrete. And since I want to make rockets, any leftover LDS and processing units will be yoinked off as well. The rocket fuel comes in on its own belt. This leads me to the key to this build. Last time I had this insane mess trying to isolate every item onto its own line while also recycling them for their byproducts, recycling those if there were too many, and then this whole thing at the end that just scrapped everything indiscriminately. I thought about it, and I realized that it's so obvious. If I want to scrap everything anyway, why not just scrap everything? If I make a big circular belt that recycles anything and everything that reaches the end, then feeds that back into the start, I can not only ensure that every recycling product is available on the trash belt, it also ensures that any excess will eventually be destroyed. It uses the same design as the scrap recycling so that it's also fully compressed, but now to finally build everything. The main advantage of Foundation on Fulgor is that now I can connect this island to my supply network. Without the ability to build on the ocean, the Roboport coverage could never reach. Not unless you're extremely lucky with island generation anyway. But with this, I can just set up the bots and let them go wild. Sure, some of them may get struck by lightning, but that's a sacrifice I'm willing to make. I don't really have anything to add, but I stood here for several minutes catching this time-lapse, so I'll be damned if I don't show the base actually being built. I guess I could point out that my method of stacking from the inserters isn't foolproof, since if a 17th item appears in the chest the very frame after the number reaches 16, one inserter will grab all 16 and the other one will grab one and drop it unstacked onto the belt. But that's infrequent enough for me to live with it. That's the base mostly built, and just look at how clean it looks. It's a far cry from the first build. I put it off until now, but for this base to actually work, it needs scrap, and so I've got to set up some scrap islands again. It's much easier this time around, however, and that's because, thanks to Foundation, I don't need to worry about the stations not fitting anymore. I've also got big mining drills, which not only mine extremely fast, but also output stacks directly onto the belt, so I'll be able to get quite a bit of throughput from just these tiny islands. I could just run them off the main electric network with big poles and Foundation, but I like them being isolated and self-sufficient. My testing showed me consuming about 32,000 scrap per minute, but each one of these mining drills can easily output 10 scrap a second, and so I'll only need about 60 total to meet my demand. With that, 3 islands should be enough for Trash 2.0. We've got the trains to bring it all in, so now it's time for the moment you've all been waiting for. The sushi belts are grabbing what they can, but they can't make anything just yet. It'll take 1 lap of trash before things like green circuits get added to the mix. The scrapper's having trouble, however, but that's nothing doubling it can't fix. There's no military science yet, because I'll need to move the cargo pad here before I can get the coal, so let's do that. It'll also bring down all of the sciences from space, and I can arrange them correctly this time. I'll just set up the sushi labs once more, and build all the rocket silos. There. Isn't it beautiful? This is exactly the kind of thing that I was imagining when I set out on this journey, and I think it's safe to say that I've conquered the trash planet. I absolutely love how cleanly it fit onto this one island. It makes my old base look like an absolute dump. That being said, by Space Age standards, it's still quite quaint, especially since it has no quality. Well, now I can finally load that all into the sushi labs. It's time to point out something quite important. I'm still using the basic labs, and that's because I'm stuck on Fulgora. You can research biolabs, but they can only be placed on Nauvis, which kinda defeats the purpose of this run, but they are insanely overpowered. Not only can they fit 4 productivity modules instead of 2, but they consume science packs half as much. That means you get straight up double your SPM. Imagine taking this whole base and doubling it. That's what we need to do to match the power of a single building. But that's not all. The half consumption factors in productivity twice, so with tier 3 prod mods, a basic lab can turn 1 science pack into effectively 1.2, whereas a biolab will turn that single pack into 2.8. Yeah, so biolab's good. Anyway, I try not to think about how this 400 SPM build could reach 1000 simply by being placed on Nauvis, as I set up these Nixie tubes to display the amount of scrap I've consumed and the number of items that have passed the trash belt. The sheer speed at which this thing is updating really puts things into perspective. This is definitely up there with some of my favorite things I've ever built. The stack inserters are really what makes this thing work. Our goal is still the Shattered Planet, and this base was not only to prove a point, but to also increase my science per minute so that I can eke out a few more infinite researches. Explosives damage and asteroid processing efficiency in particular are the most important researches for me. Unfortunately, both of those require agricultural science, and while this base makes over 400 SPM, my Gleba base does not. This thing has been haunting me since the beginning of this video, so I've finally got to deal with it. The good news is, now that I have fusion reactors, I can slap down this 100 gigawatt reactor effortlessly. I think it's about time I made an appropriately trashy build here, and since sushi belts and pipes have been treating me so well, I figured I should bring that here too. It should work fairly well, because the most annoying part of agricultural science is managing all the nutrients and spoilage, and if that's all handled on one belt, it'll be much more compact. I'm using speed modules in the buildings and, weirdly enough, double efficiency module beacons. Efficiency modules and beacons are almost entirely worthless because the power saved in the buildings will almost never exceed the power drained by the beacon itself, but these are different. Biochambers don't consume electricity, they consume nutrients, so I don't really care about power here. Rather, by doing this, I get the benefits of speeds in the machines while bringing their nutrient consumption way down. It's a little unorthodox, but this should be just enough to get me the production levels I require. Whenever it comes to agricultural science, you've got to plan for a little more than the actual SPM you want because it's gonna rot a bit before it actually makes it to the labs. The secret to efficient sushi belts is to separate off key items so that it doesn't get too long, so the bioflux will not only make the nutrients required for the belt, but they'll also be carried over onto the next sushi belt to make the science and nutrients for pentapod eggs. I've already covered this though, so you know the rest. I'm also going to want more rockets because it cuts down on the time that it takes to load the ships, and thus less spoiled science at the end of it. With the fusion power, I won't need to worry about placing as many Tesla turrets either. The other issue is, damage research all takes military science, but since upgrading my base, these two ships are no longer trawling enough coal from space, so I've got to make another one. This time, however, I'll be able to make a much more serious machine. With a fusion reactor, I can go from needing to fret over every kilowatt to putting speed modules and everything. I can also use foundries to make all the ammo it'll ever need, which is a lot because I want this thing to go fast. You're probably sick of seeing me design ships by now, and so I'll skip to the end. The other ships had 3 chemical plants making coal, but this one's got 12, all filled with prod mods and a speed beacon. Once everything's up and running, this baby's spitting out over 1,000 coal per minute. I've got it set up to fly endlessly between Vulcanus and Fulgora, and only stop at Fulgora when it's got over 5,000 coal in the hub. Thanks to that, my military science is up to par with all the others. One thing I'm thankful for is that all the important damage research doesn't take any purple science, which is great because otherwise it would compete with military science for bricks and the total SPM would be halved. Similarly, asteroid productivity takes purple science but no military, so the brick supply shouldn't be an issue. That is everything, and now I've got to make a ship to get to the shattered planet. It's going to take some time to build, and hopefully we'll get some good research while designing it. I should probably explain. The shattered planet is meant to be flown to, but not reached. The purpose of the planet is to harvest a special asteroid called Promethium, which is used in the science pack of the same name. You're supposed to fly there, collect as much as you can, and then fly back. But what happens if you keep flying there? Well, it's 4 million kilometers away, and so it's unlikely you'll even get close, but if you're really determined, the game starts increasing the asteroid density until it overwhelms your ship. It's gonna make the rocks we were dealing with look like a light drizzle. In order to survive, we're gonna need ammunition. Lots of it. This all starts with the asteroid collectors. I've mentioned before, but the basic ones suck. Even so, the asteroid density is going to be so thick, I'm praying that just spamming tons of these will be enough. The main thing keeping us from dying will be the railguns, and I'm really sorry I couldn't make this ship as trashy as the others, but we've got to get a little serious here. On the trip to the Shattered Planet, eventually you'll be getting nothing but huge asteroids, and those can only be broken with railguns, so if these things aren't firing constantly, we're done for. That being said, they're an incredible offensive weapon because they pierce through everything, taking out smaller asteroids that happen to be in their path. Because of that, we want to maximize the railgun coverage, but because they obliterate anything in front of them, including your own buildings, we're stuck with this blunt brick of a design. Any width we add to this ship is just more asteroids we'll need to blow through, so I'm trying to keep it as thin as possible while still allowing for the massive amounts of ammo production I'll need. Similarly, I don't want the rocket turrets to extend too far to the sides, because if an asteroid isn't at risk of hitting the ship, it's a wasted shot, so keeping the width to the limit of their range is smart. The railgun shells take copper wire and steel, and that means I'll need some of that advanced metallic crushing to get copper ore. I've planned for each of these foundries to have 6 beacons, half-speed, half-efficiency modules, and full-speed modules inside of them. The reason for this is if it turns out I need a little bit more production, I've still got some room to boost certain machines to meet demand. I'm planning tentatively for around 400 railgun shells a minute and 800 explosive rockets per minute. The explosives are extremely important because of that, and so I'm going to need tons of carbonic crushing. Thanks to belt stacking, I shouldn't be punished too hard for not having turbo belts, but it's going to be close. I need lots of coal plants to feed the explosives, and I need lots of explosives to feed the ammunition, so this is what it looks like. Fortunately, we can make explosives in cryo plants, and while they may be power hungry, they also have 8 module slots, which means I can fill them with loads of productivity modules and get up to 80% more explosives for free. Fully beaconed, these 10 plants should be enough to meet my soft goal of 400 to 800. I came up with those numbers through some rough guesstimation of how many I'd need if several turrets were firing non-stop, which they will be. If you want to see what that level of production looks like without quality assemblers, beacons, and modules, here it is. I'm using belt weaving since that's the only way to load everything while still having room for the beacons. That's 28 shell assemblers, all fully beaconed. I hope this is enough. That's half of the ammunition, but the other half is rockets. Now last time I used basic rockets, but this time I'm going the extra mile and making explosive rockets. Normal rockets are the obvious choice for ships because they do more damage, but explosive rockets do damage in an area. They cost 3 times as many explosives as the normal variant and are rarely worth it over 3 standard rockets, but that all changes when you're headed to the Shattered Planet. The asteroids are going to be so thick that the AoE of railguns and explosive rockets will be our only hope of even getting close. Oh yeah, I'm also making some yellow ammo, but if we're relying on gun turrets that hard, something bad must have happened. This thing is getting pretty long, but as I've said, it's best to build tall. There should be enough clearance from the guns to keep anything from drifting into the bottom of the ship, so long as we keep our speed up. Down here is where all the fuel will be made, but in contrast to my ammo production, fuel is the least of my concerns. This thing is already massive overkill, because more speed equals more asteroids, and so this thing is going to be forced to go at a crawl for most of the journey. There's also this fusion reactor. I designed it before starting on the ship, but with 3 reactors, this baby will output 700 megawatts continuously. If you factor in the draw of the reactors themselves, that's 670 megawatts of useful power. It sounds like a lot, but those foundries and cryo plants are going to stretch that to its limits. That's why I designed around half efficiency modules in the beacons. The worst part of standing up a massive ship like this is waiting for it to slowly grab the handful of asteroids it needs to make fuel. The moment it can move, it'll be able to grab way more asteroids, but getting that far takes like half an hour in orbit. I swapped out some of the railguns for collectors, since I'll only need them deep into the Shattered Planet, but once it flies, this thing can start buffering resources. I like to think of it as a compressed cube of trash rather than the scrap heaps that are my other ships, but here it is, the ultimate platform, waste not, want not. Because of how valuable carbonic asteroids are, I decided to add some dirty reprocessing near the end of the belt and reroute any carbonics back into the start so that they can cycle again, but if any asteroids make it till the end, they're thrown into space. I take one last look at my trash before it's time to go, but wait. Even though I have no plans of actually making promethium science, I've got to research it to actually fly to the Shattered Planet, and that means I've got to capture a biter nest. This game really waited until the very end to force me to land on Nauvis. Fine, I'll go there. I've just got to bring a capture rocket, some stuff to build a rocket, and some solar power. My disgust is immeasurable, and my day is ruined. Hey biters, long time no see! Well, there's the trigger tech, and all I've planned to do here, except, don't tell anyone, but I'm smuggling out a few biter eggs. I know, but they're required to make Tier 3 productivity modules. Goodbye, Nauvis, may we never meet again. I've been stuck with Tier 2s this whole time, and thinking about getting an extra 32% explosives in my cryo plants is a little too tempting for me to refuse. You know, I don't actually need to be on the ship that goes to the Shattered Planet, but it's the principle of the matter. Before I go, I stock up on things like extra grabbers, walls, repair kits, modules, railguns, belts, machines, platforms, you name it. It's gonna be a long journey, and it's not like there's rest stops along the way. I fly over Aquilo and park in orbit to load up on several tons of fusion cells. I've got to have enough to last 3 reactors running constantly for several hours, and better safe than sorry. But with all that, it's off to the solar system's edge. Here you can see the very first huge asteroids appearing, but this brick of a ship is having no problem navigating its way to the edge. I mean, it had better not, but it's a good chance to look over all my systems and make sure they're all functioning properly. I say systems, but this thing is pretty straightforward. It turns asteroid chunks into asteroid chunks. At the edge, we win the game, but that's not what we're here for. We're going even further beyond. So the edge of the solar system was 100,000 kilometers away, but the Shattered Planet is 4 million. That might sound like we've just got to go 40 times the distance, but once we're in the thick of it, it's unlikely we'll be able to maintain this speed. You can see the very first promethium asteroids beginning to appear. They're useless to us, but even worse, they have twice the health of the other asteroids. That doesn't matter so much for the railgun, but it means it'll take a lot more explosive rockets to break apart. Speaking of, they're doing a good job of weathering this storm. As we get deeper and deeper in, you can see the density beginning to pick up. We're only 5% of the way there, and already my explosive rocket production is reaching its limit. I've got to keep a close eye on the production charts, because if my consumption ever outstrips my production, that's the sign that we're minutes away from a total disaster. I'm not sure you need me to remind you what would happen if these guns stopped firing for a single moment. Now that there's more than enough asteroids around, it's time to swap over to the complete railgun coverage. But you know how I left efficiency modules so that it could boost processes as necessary? Well, turns out that the absolute upper limit of what I planned for is just enough, and we're hardly even there. 600,000 kilometers is when things start getting serious, and I'm forced to start throttling my engines. I have the fuel supply set up on a clock and a pump that pulses on and off. By reducing how long the pump is on, the less thrust makes it to the engines. This is all I can do when my ammo production starts to become overwhelmed. Just look at how many asteroids I'm throwing overboard. I kept getting sniped in the back by these tiny fragments, and I don't know why it took me so long to just place a single gun turret there. The yellow ammunition is basically unused, except for when this thing needs to shoot a stray asteroid once every 10 minutes. I'm reporting live from the trip to the Shattered Planet, and you wouldn't believe the weather. Around 1.2 million is when the total density begins to max out, but this isn't the end of the danger. This is pushing my craft to its limit. My power is ever so slightly not enough when I'm running at peak, and every fluctuation means I'm making ammo slower than I should be. Turns out 4 million is a long way. I sped up the game so it wouldn't be so painful, but the biggest issue has appeared. It wasn't happening so much with the regular asteroids, but as promethium density increases, it's becoming more and more likely that some wild asteroid will slip through my net. My biggest threat isn't the asteroids themselves, it's the explosive rockets targeting something close to the ship. The railguns have been forced to tank the occasional hit and eat all my repair packs, but I've been losing so many collectors, and it's become a problem. Thanks to all my damage research, these basic collectors die in one blast from my own rockets. There's missing space, and that's because I've already blown through all 30 of the backups I brought with me. It took me a while to even realize that this was happening. I've got so much attrition that I've gone through all 1,000 repair packs that I brought as well. I'm forced to reload an earlier save and see if I can't prevent that horrible fate. I was streaming this to my patrons, and one of them reminded me that I could add an extra fusion generator to my reactor. Because even though this is only a 700 gigawatts reactor, 750 gigawatts worth of generators will allow it to buffer some plasma and smooth out those power fluctuations. There were so many little tweaks I had to make to this thing that were lost in the 7 hours of footage, but the biggest one was another reminder that I could just make repair packs on the ship. I've got iron plates and copper wire, that's all they take. I hastily assemble some and do some spaghetti routing to drop those into the hub, and now I don't need to fear my railguns dying to attrition anymore. I definitely couldn't have made it without this. It's always scary seeing these huge asteroids angling towards the ship, but as long as I keep a reasonable speed, they won't have enough of an angle to actually strike me. It's important to keep moving, but even so, I'm forced to drop my speed down to the 70s. That's less than half the speed we had when we started this endeavor. As promethium density keeps increasing, so does my ammo usage. I'm trying desperately to research more explosive damage, but there's still a problem. That being said, it's holding together remarkably well. I felt so confident that I left it running to go take a shower, and came back just in time to see this. So that's another reload, but I've got no idea what happened. I realize that I've lost so many asteroid collectors to friendly fire and freak asteroids that I'm no longer gathering enough asteroids. The 80% asteroid productivity I've researched is doing its best, but I just don't have enough carbonics to make the explosives required anymore. More promethium asteroids means less useful asteroids too. Looking at the front of the ship, I can see that the chunks are creating this cone-shaped dead zone, and so to meet demand, I've got to move the ones I have closer up to the front, even though that's the most dangerous area. We're 75% of the way there though, I've just got to hold on a little longer. It is so red. The YouTube compression algorithm is going to love this one. This thing is barely holding together. I've lost even more collectors, but they're trying their best. I've got to hand it to them. I thought these collectors would be the biggest weakness of zero quality, but with this much density, they hardly need to move at all to get a full hand, and so they can get a lot more than I expected. At 3.9, the asteroids have reached peak saturation. We are so close, but with only 8 collectors left, I am slowly choking from lack of asteroids. I restructured the reprocessors to stop throwing chunks overboard and instead route everything back into the beginning, and that lets me hold on for a little while, but it's not enough. I am forced to drop the speed even lower. It gets so low that the engines start to look like they're flaming out, barely spluttering along as this thing limps on its last legs. This has taken me over 7 hours. I cannot afford to lose it here, but without enough speed, these asteroids start to drift alarmingly close. I am forced to pick up speed just to keep my reactor from getting sniped, but will it be enough? I don't know, but somehow, by the grace of scrap, with its last gasp, the shattered planet comes into view. We've made it. I don't think I can adequately express how frantically checking production charts, desperately trying to eke out as much production as possible, and urgently trying to patch broken collectors for over 7 hours felt. If I'd applied everything I'd learned at the start, I think I could have cruised here no problem, but for its maiden voyage and my first time ever trying to get here, I am so proud of myself. And we still can't land on it. Yeah, as much as I wish it were otherwise, getting to the Shattered Planet is mostly just bragging rights, but it's one hell of a trip. And I think I've proved quite definitively that you do not need quality to complete any of the game's content. After I streamed this, it inspired one of my patrons to try and make the trip without any beacons or modules either, but how do I get home? Speaking of, shout out to all my patrons who generously fund these videos. It's thanks to them that I feel comfortable keeping these videos free from sponsors, and why I feel like I can just make whatever I want. My ship seems to be having issues, but I guess this is one way to get back home. Come on, it puts me back on Nauvis.